So for our next panel, I'm going to introduce our moderator, and then he will go ahead and introduce all of the participants. We're really excited to welcome Professor Gustavo Bobonis here. He's a member of our JPAL State and Local Innovation Initiative, and comes to us from the University of Toronto, where he's a professor of economics. And I'm not sure how he does this, but he manages to split his time between Toronto and Puerto Rico, where I think he actually spends more than half the year, about half. He can tell you where he spends his time, but manages to make that commute, and has been an integral research partner in our work in Puerto Rico. And Puerto Rico was one of the first partners that we selected as a part of this initiative in the first year. And Gustavo's work focuses on the social and political determinants of human development. So please join me in welcoming him and our panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marianne. So yes, I do spend quite a bit of time in Puerto Rico because my family likes the heat. They don't like Toronto winters. So thank you very much, Marianne, for the introduction and for the invitation. So I'm going to do the easy part of the job in the panel this morning, which is to introduce the members of these exciting partnerships who are going to tell us about the exciting work they've been doing both in Rochester and DC. So let me start by introducing the first partners. Professor Bill Evans. He's a Keough Hesburgh Professor of Economics at Notre Dame, who's been collaborating with the City of Rochester. And we have as a representative of the project in Rochester, Mr. Henry Fitz, the Director of Innovation of the City of Rochester. And the second team that we're going to have, telling us about the exciting work they've been doing in DC is Ms. Anita Ravishankar, fellow at the lab at DC, and Commander Ralph Ennis. He's actually the Chief of Staff of the Metro Police Department in DC. So I think the plan for the panel is for the two teams to tell us about the work they've been doing and how to build and sustain these partnerships. We're going to start with the Rochester team, and then we'll follow up with the DC team.
Morning, folks. Thanks for the introduction, Gustavo. I'm Henry Fitz. I'm with the City of Rochester, New York. I'm the director of our Office of Innovation. We're located in the mayor's office. We're working closely with a huge array of community partners through an initiative called the Rochester Monroe Anti-Poverty Initiative, which is really every major actor in our community coming together around a serious challenge we have for poverty and child poverty in Rochester. Our project also has a wide array of partners working to implement a specific program around adult mentorship and service navigation. We have three nonprofit partners operating the program. Of course, we have great partnership, the academic side and the evaluation from Bill's team, as well as local academic Javier Espinosa through Rochester Institute of Technology, and of course JPAL funding us through initial design and now implementation. So really quickly about my team. We were formed in 2015 thanks to a grant from Bloomberg Philanthropies. We're an internal consulting group, reports to the mayor. She's directed us to work initially on anti-poverty strategies, working with community partners, provide data-driven solutions to some of our city's most challenging issues. And pretty much we provide the kind of data and evaluation support to a lot of the pilot programs that are being developed by the community, make sure they have the ability to show outcomes, return on investment, position themselves for funding and growth and scale up. Also, my team is now transitioning to focus on internal City Hall process improvement support projects going into 2018, 2019. All right, so a little bit more about this JPAL evaluation. The program's current title, it's gone on over a couple name changes, is now called Bridges to Success. It's testing the application of a professional mentor, service navigator, life coach on a family and a household, help them set and achieve goals to growth, help them connect to an array of services to achieve those goals. Of course, the research team, Bill's team through Notre Dame Lab for Economic Opportunity, Javier's team who works with us week to week, day to day on the ground in Rochester, and of course Thankful for weekly calls with Bill's team, helping us keep on track and make sure the evaluation is always top of mind, as well as the program delivery. As I mentioned, Rochester's poverty challenges are quite severe. Number 4 in the U.S. for overall poverty rate, number 1 for child poverty rate. And despite our challenges, we seem to have an amazing array of well-funded, well-run nonprofits with great services. How is that possible that we have such great services in our community, but poverty is still terrible and worsening? And as the mayor likes to say, Mayor Lovely Warren, who I report to, she likes to say our community is program rich, but results poor. So we have this fragmented service ecosystem serving different aspects of a person, but none of it's connected and none of it's really focused on long-term outcomes. So our intervention pairs a head of household and a family with that mentor life coach over a 2-year period. They work with them to assess where they are across 8 domain areas of their life when they come in the program, and then they have recurring meetings with them over periods of that 2 years to set goals and achieve those goals and see how they grow in those 8 domain areas. I'm listing right here just 2 of them: housing and educational attainment. But there's basically a 5-point scale within each of the 8 domain areas that show somebody on a path from pretty much crisis to stability. And we want to get people to the top of each of those levels. And of course, connecting them to those services to achieve those goals. And that ultimate goal is self-sufficiency, increased earnings off of public benefits, etc. So the evaluation is structured to look at impacts primarily on earnings, household earnings. That's the primary variable that we're designed and powered to detect, but also be looking at employment status, public benefits utilization, and healthcare utilization. Primarily, we'll be measuring that through intake and follow-up surveys that the participants do at intake and then 1-year increments up to 1 year after the program. And then we've been working very diligently with our state and local partners on data sharing and are very, very close to data sharing with New York State to support the evaluation with New York State Department of Health and Human Services. Look at public benefit utilization data and earnings data, as well as Department of Labor. So we've designed the evaluation in the program in kind of two cohorts, with a subset of the first cohort as a beta class, 25 in treatment, 25 control, to work out the kinks. We learned a lot through that process that we were able to tweak the remainder of cohort 1, which is another 125 in treatment and 125 control. And that's been underway since January 2017. And then cohort 2 is a planned future phase, which we need to secure funding for. Would be another 150 in treatment, 150 in control. Eligibility for the program is 200% of the federal poverty threshold or below. Ability to work, because it's a program that's focused on getting people increased earnings and employment. You need to actually, unfortunately, be able to work. There's other programs in the community for folks who are not physically able to work for various reasons. We direct people to those programs. And it's focused on the city of Rochester, this geography. I also have a map here that just kind of shows very briefly our poverty geographic nature. It's a very concentrated issue in kind of crescent shape of neighborhoods to the north of our downtown. It's a very isolated area that people from the suburbs, visitors, really don't have any reason to travel through. It's very easy. That's part of the reason why I think our community was so surprised to learn about the data, to see how bad it is, because it's easy not to see, it's easy to ignore. And so we've focused a lot of our initial efforts in this blue area here, which is our kind of pilot district, where we've worked to deploy some of our first pilot initiatives, and several of them at once. And we're hoping that, and this is not part of the evaluation, I'll say, but as a combination, all the pilot programs being deployed there, that we'll be able to see a really visible change in the character and the feel of the neighborhoods as this kind of movement takes hold. Briefly, the timeline. As I mentioned, we've launched Cohort 1 service in January 2017. They're in the program for 2 years. We're still in the process of doing complete enrollment. And then they're surveyed up to a year after they exit the program. And then Cohort 2 would start in 2019. And we're working to hopefully secure funding to do that, to increase the power and the reliability of the findings of the study. So yeah, enrollment progress. I think a lot of folks are happy with our progress, and a lot of folks are wishing we're moving faster. I think that's been a tug and pull across the way. I think the program staff and the evaluation team are excited to see where we are, but the political and the community leadership is always saying, why isn't this program fully enrolled yet? It's over a year. Why don't we have people in it? But we are 73% enrolled, and we did make a few tweaks to the eligibility requirement to help with enrollment, including dropping geographic requirement, a high school diploma requirement, and an English language requirement, which has helped us boost enrollment. And my team helped deploy a very large-scale door-to-door recruitment effort in that target geography. All right, and I think one big focus of today and these convenings is to talk about shared challenges and lessons learned throughout all these different implementations. So one of our main challenges stems directly from the structure of the partnership itself. We have one nonprofit who's the lead agency overseeing several implementing agencies, and the kind of chain of accountability has been an issue. Who really owns what? Who's ultimately in charge of recruitment and getting us to that goal? Different HR departments. We have two different nonprofits employing the actual frontline staff with different HR departments, different standards. That's been a challenge. And then, of course, just communication across all these entities working together. I think we've made some progress in implementing some changes to address some of those challenges. Again, slow recruitment process in the eyes of some. It's been a challenge, and the program's been criticized for how slow things have been going, but it's a brand new program, and I think we need just to remember this is basically a startup, almost like a startup business. We're learning as we go, and fortunately we built in a lot of ability to tweak things as we go to address some of those challenges as well. Data sharing has been a 1.5 to 2 year journey, learning how to find the right people at the state and how to move this process along. That's been a serious challenge. We're very, very close and very excited to actually have a data sharing agreement with New York State. The frontline staff, I think, but even more training and more insight into those trainings with the academic team would be another area. I think there's some uncomfortability with asking for consent and asking for things like social security numbers, which are essential for some of the administrative data sharing that we're hoping to achieve. So lessons learned again, clear accountability chain, make sure that people have the authority to tell other people what to do, that there are people assigned with specific responsibilities, that we have a strong communication plan. I think we've made a lot of strides in that area, but if we did it again, we'd structure how we deployed this program differently, for sure. Set and manage expectations for recruitment speed. I think we really should have we should have told people it would take until at least Q2 of 2018 to enroll this program from the start. Hard to know, but really important that we set and manage those expectations because we weather a lot of scrutiny for the recruitment speed. Marketing was definitely under budgeted. I think we had to, some of our community partners had to do fundraising to do additional marketing. We need to budget more for that. And there's no replacement for door-to-door recruitment. That was the single biggest thing that drove enrollment, was our door-to-door recruitment effort that we were able to do through the AmeriCorps program that we have. We have 30 individuals placed in our libraries and rec centers who we were able to pull out and do door-to-door recruitment effort. That kind of a labor force is huge, especially if you need to do enrollment at this scale, this speed. Even if it's possible, getting to your potential data sharing parties even earlier, getting to the right people earlier, getting to the right decision makers earlier, so we know how to structure the consent forms before they launch, so that we get those through the IRB process before we start the program, so we're not tweaking that, things like that. That's really important, and obviously wish New York State had an actual clear data sharing policy and system to approach them, who to the right people to come talk to. And then again, as I mentioned, the frontline staff, I think we could have done a better job training them on the importance of the evaluation, the importance of data collection and the consent, et cetera. So that's what I got for our little presentation. I think we have time for, we're happy to answer other questions, and I'd love, Bill, if you have any color commentary here on what I've provided.
Well, I think we're going to do the other one, and then we'll have questions, right? So.
Sure. I think so. Yeah.
Great.
So Henry, thank you very much.
Yep.
Good morning. Okay, so little housekeeping first. It is true, I was a chief of staff for the police department for 10 years. But when Kathy Lanier left, I transitioned out. Chief Newsham had a little bit of mercy on me. And now I run our training division, so I oversee all the training for the police department now. So that is my current job. Okay? So, my gray hair, it's turning brown again, so. So let me just start. So our body camera program started well before all the national scrutiny on policing. It's been about a little over 3 years that we got into this. But like many police departments currently in the United States, we adopted a body-worn camera program in anticipation that the technology, along with the other stuff we're doing at MPD, would help give a aura of legitimacy to our police department. Kathy Lanier was really big when she came in 2007 on opening the police department up. A little bit about MPD is prior to 1998, we were a very different police department. There was a huge story in the Washington Post about the shootings and everything that was going on. We were shooting a lot of people. There was not a lot of accountability for what was going on. So they brought Ramsey in from Chicago, and Ramsey did a good job of changing the police department, changing the leadership, bringing the Justice Department and making us accountable for our actions. So by the time Chief Lanier came in 2007, there was already accountability in place. So what she wanted to do is let the public know we were accountable. So the body cameras, she figured, was the next step amongst the other things we were doing to let the public know that. We knew we were going to uncharted territory, especially for a large police department. And there was a lot of design that we had to do as far as policies and outreach and things like that to make sure that we could have a program that was successful. It took about 3 years to fully design and implement the program, and we had some of the smartest people in the police department, and we have some very smart people in the police department. We had some of the smartest people doing it. Towards the end, when it came time to implement the programs, when I came in about a year before we rolled it out. To do this, we reached out to all of our stakeholders. So at the very beginning, we engaged the Fraternal Order of Police. If you look nationally, the Fraternal Order of Police is like a big roadblock in the way of a lot of police departments. Unions are a big roadblock. So we had them on board early on, our prosecutors in DC, and then a wide variety of community groups from the far left to the far right. And all those people sat in the same room and we discussed this. Imagine how those went. Mm-hmm. But we did. And we came out with some policies that made sense. Importantly, the chief knew, and it's funny, I've been smiling listening to y'all talk this morning. She knew that we had to be able to legitimize our program, and one of the ways we were going to do that was to incorporate evaluation into the rollout of the program. So we wanted to understand if they really worked and how they worked, the body cameras, that is. So, there was actually, in these community discussions, what happened was we got community impact, and then the council enacted legislation that basically said, you are going to do these things. We're going to give you the money, but you're going to do these things. So one of the things that actually was written into the legislation for the program was the need to have a study. So that was very helpful in making sure that we were able to do it. We also had buy-in from the mayor's office early on to be able to do this. And they understood that we didn't know what the results were going to be, and that helped too. So for that study, we turned to the experts, the lab at DC and Anita over there. And Anita was embedded in the police department. She sat up in the chief's office with me, and we figured out how we were going to do this. She managed the design and the implementation of the study. So think about this. We have a police department who runs everything ourselves. Police tend to be people that don't like to listen to other people. That's just the way police are. But we actually deferred to Anita, and she told us how we were going to roll it out, who we were giving it to, when we were giving it to them. And we had to sit in front of the chief on these regular meetings and say, look, this is what the study has dictated we're going to do. And we did it. So I'm proud to say that that it worked out well. So what we did in particular is we had a staggered deployment process. We rolled out cameras district by district and randomly assigned about half of our officers to wear the BWCs. We had a treatment and control group. The treatment had, the control group didn't. And one of the things I'm very proud of is that to date, as far as I know, this is the single largest study of body cameras by anybody in the United States, with over 2,200 officers participating in the study. So I'm not going to get into the technical stuff. I'm going to turn it over to Anita, but I will tell you this, is that prior to this, I was very skeptical of the RTC program, and I'll tell you that now I've bought in hook, line, and sinker, and you'll see we're going to do some innovative things in DC. Thank you.
So the lab at DC is a team of researchers that's actually embedded within the district government. So we have about 15 social scientists and data scientists that are based out of the Office of the City Administrator. And this kind of placement allows us to engage with the various agencies in the district government in a more intimate, frequent way, and also kind of helps build in the sustainability to the process. And the goal of the lab, of course, much like JPAL itself, is to integrate scientific insights and methods into the day-to-day work of governing. So we help inform the design of new programs and policies, and then we also support the evaluation of those programs and policies. So as Commander Ennis noted, there is a kind of big question around how body-worn cameras can help policing. There are a lot of assumptions around how this technology might actually work. Just to remind ourselves, the key kind of two mechanisms through which we would expect body cameras to work is that they would help improve police and citizen interactions. The monitoring the cameras would create, would bring to bear, would support kind of socially desirable changes in behavior and have that sort of civilizing effect. And then the video footage itself would have evidentiary value as far as internal affairs and criminal investigations. So this is what kind of the expectations were around body-worn cameras. DOJ obviously spent lots of money on these programs. A lot of departments around the country, I think 95% of large departments either had already implemented body cameras or planned to, and that was a figure as of several years ago. So, but whether these effects actually occur is a factual question, right? And we can use science to answer it. And the police department was on board with that. And so we set up kind of the gold standard, a randomized controlled trial, assigned about half our officers to the treatment group and half to control. We had very simple criteria for participating. Basically, you were an active full duty status of rank sergeant or below, and you're assigned to kind of patrol duties in an outward facing role, which gave us, as you mentioned, a pretty large study sample to work with. The outcomes we actually looked at, we looked at police use of force, And that we disaggregated into kind of serious uses of force, which is defined by our policy, as well as other types of force to see if there's any differential effect of the cameras. We looked at citizen complaints, the total number filed, as well as how they were adjudicated. We looked at policing activity, which is a category that captures a couple of different outcomes. One thing was around officer discretion. So if we look at the more discretionary types of arrests, such as for disorderly conduct or a simple assault, is there any difference there? We also looked at kind of as a proxy for civilian behavior, are officer injuries changing when officers are wearing cameras? Or is there any effect on arrests for assaults against police officers? And then finally, we began looking at judicial outcomes. And here the question was, if there's a camera on the arresting officer, does it have any effect on the prosecution of charges as well as the downstream court outcomes? Are there plea deals? Are we getting guilty verdicts, et cetera? So everything I just described in much more detail, actually, in terms of the randomization protocol, the actual police department, the outcomes and the definitions, as well as data sources, and the actual statistical models we use to do the analysis, all of that was documented in a lot of detail in our pre-analysis plan, which it's important to note we wrote up and put online before any of us saw the data collected from the study. And it's available on the Open Science Framework, so it's actually a screenshot of the plan online. And in addition to posting this there, we also conducted quite a few stakeholder engagement sessions, as well as presented the study design at conferences. And kind of one reason to do this is, as many of you work with data know, you have a surprising amount of discretion in how you work with that data, and there can be conscious or unconscious biases that can play into that work. So by putting all this online, we really committed ourselves, tied our hands across the board, researchers and MPD, to doing the analysis exactly as laid out in this plan. So when you would see the findings several months later, you knew how we got there. So that was not really a question. It also gave us a really kind of new, innovative way to engage with the community. We spoke to high school students, which is the group you see at the top. We had the chief himself and Commander Ennis present at an academic conference for policymakers or practitioners and researchers. And we also have an image over here in the bottom corner of a presentation we did at City Hall to really kind of engage the community more actively beyond just posting the plan online. And at all of these sessions, we did this one activity where we asked our audiences their own best guesses for how they thought body cameras would affect two outcomes, police use of force and citizen complaints. And here, each kind of square represents a different group that we spoke to. We have civil rights group, DC government partners, our students, MPD civilian staff and MPD sworn personnel, public defenders. And the blue is those who predicted body-worn cameras would lead to fewer uses of force. Red is predictions of an increase in use of force. And gray is that there would be no difference. As you can see, the intuitions are a little bit across the board, across these different groups. There are obviously a lot more MPD sworn who we were able to poll, so that those graphs are a little bit bigger. And then the same is true for complaints. They're pretty widely distributed across those three response options. And the goal of this activity was to really kind of tease out the idea that we all have different intuitions about how cameras might work. We don't know the answer, and that's precisely why we should do this kind of scientific evaluation of a program. So what did we find? The top line kind of result is that we found body-worn cameras had no detectable effect on any of the outcomes we measured across all the categories I mentioned earlier. So I'll go over one in a little bit more detail and kind of skip through the rest for the sake of time. So quickly, with use of force, if we take a group of about 1,000 officers with body-worn cameras, over the course of a year, we would expect that they report about 75 more uses of force than a group of 1,000 officers without cameras over that same year. However, our data are also consistent, as you can see those confidence intervals coming out from that bar, with there being a decrease in use of force of about 100 uses of force to an increase of about 240 uses of force. So when, of course, our estimates cross the negative, 0, and positive, we say this is null or statistically insignificant. And at the end of the day, this is what we find kind of across, citizen complaints is the same, arrest for disorderly conduct is the same. It's true across the board, even for, all the categories we looked at. So we find that the body-worn cameras had no effect on the outcomes we measured. What to make of this? So one possibility is that DC might be a little bit different. There might be minimal misconduct to improve upon in DC, where departments with some kind of greater, more widespread misconduct issues, body-worn cameras might make a difference. DC, as the police force for the capital city, endures maybe a higher degree of scrutiny. It's slightly more training around how they deal with protests and things of that kind of nature. Commander Ennis also alluded to the substantial reform efforts the police department undertook over the past 20 years. So those efforts might have rooted out some of the misconduct issues that we might hope body cameras would help address also, so that the cameras had little effect on that particular question. Another possibility is that the null might just be real. Body-worn cameras don't have an effect on the outcomes we measured in this study. Another possibility is that there might be an effect, but it was hidden. This is basically a spillover issue, where if I have a camera and I'm on scene, but Commander Ennis doesn't have a camera, but he's near me, that his behavior might still be affected by me wearing a camera. And so again, if we're comparing control and treatment groups in the RCT analysis, we're not seeing a difference then. Another possibility is that just the introduction of the body-worn camera program to the department created some sort of normative or cultural shift, so that even giving cameras to a subset of the officers affects everyone. So we tried to dig into the kind of second and third explanations a little bit further with a time series analysis to see, maybe the control and treatment groups both changed their behavior, and did that change over time? This is looking at use of force at time equals 0 is when cameras are deployed. So if you look before and after, there's really not much difference at all between the control and treatment groups before or after treatment groups received camera. And the same is true of complaints. We have a pretty flat line, so not seeing much behavioral change here at all, which suggests that maybe it's not a spillover issue. Perhaps the null finding is true in the case of DC. So kind of coming back into the engagement side of our work, everything I just described again, from how we set up the study, why we did it, through the methodology we used, the findings, graphs for people to play around with, was laid out on a dedicated website. So what we really wanted is for anyone, regardless of whether they took those statistics classes in undergrad or not, could come to this website and really get an accessible explanation of what we did and why and what it might mean for the district. And so you can just go to that website right there. The link is on the bottom, and check out our work there. We also followed up. We did the stakeholder engagements on the front end around the pre-analysis plan, and then we returned to that again once the study findings were out to kind of close the loop there. So these are images from a community conversation on the top corner there, and then on the bottom we have the chief again presenting at a major policing conference, acknowledging that our findings are not just relevant for DC, but a contribution to the broader knowledge around body-worn cameras and what they do or don't do. So kind of to wrap up very quickly, 3 takeaways. From the study itself, we would suggest that we recalibrate our expectations of body-worn cameras. At the outset, the conversation was that maybe this technology is sort of a panacea for accountability. We would suggest that it might be a piece of the puzzle, but that we should kind of temper our expectations. Integrating open science best practices takes time, but it was really well worth the effort. And just as a kind of snapshot of that, these are some of the social media responses to the release of the study, along with the website and the planned community conversations we held immediately afterwards, that people really responded to the police department actually doing the study in the first place, and to the openness and transparency of the process and the accessibility of the actual write-up. And then finally, in terms of the partnership itself, I think we really help foster a culture shift in a lot of ways. This question is something I hear a lot at the department where I am actually embedded there. So I now get emails with the subject line evaluation request or data analytics request, or can we talk about this and how we might fix this or address this? So I'm really happy to hear this question popping up a lot more across the department's work, as well as across the other district agencies the lab has been working with. So I'm going to hand it back over to Commander Ennis to wrap up, but thank you.
So just to put it in perspective, is that if you listen here, we had the RCT after we had already purchased the program and were rolling the cameras out. We spent $5.7 million buying body cameras for our agency from initial purchase, and then we spent about $2.5 million a year on data storage, phone service, and things that go along with it. So the leap of faith it took, I don't think that could be understated from the government to do this RCT with that type of investment in a policing activity. So I want to give praise to the mayor, Muriel Bowser. She's very, very good, and she's very progressive, so we're lucky to have her. So Anita put this quote. It was in the New York Times. They came and did a story on our study. And I said, this is what I said, we tend in policing, I'm referring to policing nationally, we tend to rely on anecdotal evidence in policing or compare this year to that year. This study was a whole other thing. And the study opened the door, as Anita alluded to at the end of her presentation, opened the door to us using this methodology in almost everything we do now. So if we're going to spend money on something, we're going to look either at whether it could be well spent or not before we do, in most cases, if we're able to do it. So participating in this process and working closely with the researchers on a daily basis gave us a lot of exposure to how RCTs work and how we might apply it across all other areas of the department and the government for that matter. We use these tools all the time, and we're going to have a lot more. We're going to do a lot more with the body cameras too. As time goes on, you'll see some additional research coming out because judicial outcomes take a little longer. The time we had for this doesn't, so we'll see that. And the one thing I wish we'd have been able to do, I'll say this, is I wish we'd have been able to survey community impact prior to do it, because one of the things I truly believe is that the body cameras aren't going away in DC. They're not. We're committed to keeping them regardless of what the study says, and the legitimacy that it can give the department through being open, and it can't be understated. So I know the chief is committed to keeping them regardless of what the study says. So I wish we'd have been able to do that a little bit before. And I also, let's see. The last thing I want to say is that so when you open Pandora's box with these RCTs and being open to what the findings are, you have to be consistent. So you got to be committed if you're going to use RCTs that you're going to release them regardless of what they say and have that strategy out front. So we learned that early on, and I'm sure in some of the other things that the lab's doing in the city, you'll be very interested to see what the results say. So thank you, and I guess we're done with our part.
Great. Thank you very much to all the speakers. So I have so many questions that, but I'm going to hold, and I'm not going to ask any of them because I'm sure that you have many more than I do. So I would like to open the floor for questions to any of the teams. Yes.
Question about the Bodyworn camera evaluation. Oh, sure, yeah. Hi, I'm Janie Roundtree. I'm the Executive Director of the California Policy Lab. I'm really happy to be here today. I just had two questions about the substance of the body-worn camera evaluation. As you know, some of the other studies that were not RCTs showed reduction in citizen complaint, but not reduction in use of force. And the suspicion is that it was actually a reduction in false complaints overall. So I'm curious, as you defined citizen complaint, were you defining it as a substantiated complaint or any complaint initiated? And then the second question is, there was an RCT actually that I don't think has been published yet at a major law enforcement agency in the UK that actually showed some protective effect, particularly for officers who are female or younger. And they were measuring, I think, both through survey data and also through workers' comp type claims or use of sick leave. And so there's some belief maybe that wearing a camera might actually help younger or potentially female officers. So I'm curious if you looked at those issues.
Yeah, so to the second point you just made, we did look at officer injuries to see if there was any effect there. We didn't find anything. And then with the complaints, we looked at the overall number filed as well as whether they were sustained, not sustained, and we had a category called insufficient facts. So we're hoping that, is that if evidentiary value is there, that maybe that category will go down. Things moved in the expected directions, but not in a statistically significant way. So that was kind of where we landed on that.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Just for DC to put in perspective, because I know y'all are from all over, in DC, if somebody picks up the phone or walks into a police station and makes a complaint on a police officer, the processes are in place that there's no way that complaint's not completely followed up on through an investigation and or reach back to the person who made the complaint knowing there's a resolution. So the accountability in the city is super high for the officers to make sure they're doing the right thing. So I say that to say is I'm not bashing other police departments, but everybody's not in the same level as DC, so you have to take that into account when you're thinking about this study.
Hi, Christine Riley, Family Support Services in the City of Chicago. So I had a question about the community engagement. What was that? How was the police department's relationship with the community before this? How is it now? And after the findings were, put out to the community, what was some of the comments? Were they for or against? What was the reaction from the community?
So we, as Commander Ennis noted, we were not able to do surveys kind of before and after that would have gotten at that in a more rigorous way. I think the police department had a generally good relationship with the community at that point in time. Obviously, there's variation across different communities. But the engagement sessions themselves, I think what was nice about it is that we had both the lab and the police department attend all the engagement sessions. We had Commander Ennis would walk through kind of the particulars of the actual program policy. So a lot of people just didn't know what the actual policies were. And so being able to just have that conversation of how does this work? Like if I stop and talk to a cop, or if I get pulled over for a traffic ticket and I have a complaint, like can I actually look at my video footage? And so the policies vary a lot across the country and how different police departments have approached this. So just to be able to have, that piece of the conversation, I think helped them conceptualize what is the police department actually doing, and is this program actually about transparency and accountability, or is it something, something else? So I think that piece was useful there. And then in terms of the response, what I've seen has just been like, we thank you for doing this study. And then, certainly there are advocates for getting rid of the cameras, and others who still believe that, having that camera footage there, as well as a track record in DC of the mayor having released several videos in the aftermath of officer-involved shootings, supports the idea that not only do we have this camera program just to say we have it, but we're actually making the footage available in those moments where the call for it is, pretty loud.
And so that's to us, that's the biggest piece, is that we've had cases to where shootings occurred and the family has went out and said they shot an unarmed person, but you pull a body camera video and the person's holding a knife 2 feet away from somebody's getting ready to stab. So it definitely helps in that. And the other thing is we use them consistently. Anita loves this, is we use them all the time to inform our training. So we look for things that when we see the video that we think officers can do better, and if we see patterns, we design training around.
Can I ask about the patterns part? So one of the things that you hear is that when officers use discretion, sometimes they use discretion in a way that's very racially biased. And so I've often wondered, is there some way to sort of figure out, as an officer is walking down the street, they see a sort of incident, they don't enforce it for non-people of color, and they do enforce it for people of color. And that's one of the things that I feel like body-worn cameras could actually say about how discretionary enforcement works. So I was wondering if you had looked at that, or if you had any comments on that.
I mean, so we have a lot of data in DC, and we look at it in many different ways. We publish our annual reports with complaint data, use of force data. It encompasses a lot of what you're talking about. Specific to the ability to do that, I will have to defer to Anita on that one. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that is not a thing we looked at. I mean, one issue in those instances, obviously only certain officers had cameras to begin with, and if you don't have video footage of that non-enforced incident, then we just don't know that it didn't happen, right? So that's kind of one underlying issue. It's administrative data. You have the records that you have and not the things that people never reported. So that's just kind of an underlying issue. To your question, though, there's a study done by Jennifer Eberhardt at Stanford that was published earlier this year where they analyzed the audio of the body-worn camera footage to see how people were speaking to different subjects that they were interacting with, and they did see some differences in terms of how police officers, I think it was in a Northern California, I forget which jurisdiction it was, spoke with people of different backgrounds. So there is some work that is being done in that space, but one thing we face in DC, and really all across all these studies, is that administrative data issue. So
I have a question about, and I think for the two teams, about how how did you set up the partnerships, and what do you think were the main elements to make those partnerships successful in terms of negotiating the relationship between the government and the researchers and evaluators?
So the idea for this really in Rochester came from the mayor's office. Catholic Family Services in Rochester was going to be sort of organizing the delivery of services. They were familiar with our work at our lab through our relationship with Catholic Charities USA, and so that's how we got pulled in. In terms of how this thing really got leveraged, though, it's because there was an important partner here that said they wanted this done, and they wanted it done as an RCT. And so my guess is without sort of the support from the mayor's office, this would have been awfully hard to do. On the positive side, Catholic Family Services had been to a number of presentations that we've made with JPAL on to the Catholic Charities Network about the importance of evaluation and how it can be transformative, and so they were kind of bought off. And then one of the local community partners had been involved in an RCT with MDRC already. And so I think there was some experience here, but at the end of the day, what really drove the train is that the mayor's office wanted this to happen, and so you had a champion that kind of made the whole evaluation work.
And it seems like perhaps that was also the case in DC. Perhaps, sorry, Henry, go ahead.
Yeah, and I just wanted to mention, and it's really been come from the mayor and really become a whole community-wide mindset that evaluation and rigorous data needs to be built into all of our anti-poverty work in response to the statistics, in response to kind of the mayor's challenge to the nonprofit community about doing better with evaluation.
So I just want to add one piece of that, is that I think that, and I'm finding myself doing this now, is that you either get the executive saying we're going to do this, right? Or you have somebody who's in a leadership position who wants to get something done and knows that in order to expend the money to do it, they need some sort of justification. So they reach out and ask an academic, hey, can you assist with this? Because I need some help to justify this expenditure.
So this resonates a lot with with my experience in Puerto Rico, and I also wanted to add perhaps the embed process within the police department in Washington also helped.
Yeah, I mean, I think just being there on a day-to-day basis gave us the opportunity to learn a lot from each other. So it gave me the opportunity to really understand the nuances of policing and how like a given interaction will go, so that when we got into the data, we knew what kind of interactions it was representing, as well as what it wasn't representing. Okay. So it gave us that kind of familiarity and intimacy, and that they were able to kind of see that we were going to be careful about it and trust us with, a lot of data, right? Like personnel records is not a joke, right? Especially police personnel records in this moment. And so being able to build that trust, and then from my point of view, I would say our police officials are very informed about statistical analysis now. Like Commander Ennis can tell you about why an RCT is better than pre-post design in his sleep now, which I think is kind of awesome. And that knowledge is getting filtered through the department. So I would say from my point of view, it was an amazing learning experience for me. And just to see kind of, like I said, that question just start to bubble up more, I think that proximity helped a lot.
I would say the same thing happened to us in Rochester, in that we got pulled into it through our relationship with Catholic Family Services, and you try to learn as much as you can about what's going on the ground, but you can't be there on a day-to-day basis. So we pulled Javier in, who's in Rochester, and I think from the research standpoint, that really changed the game for us, because then you have some eyes and ears on a weekly basis there that can tell you exactly what's going on and what the challenges might be and how we might have to adjust the demands of the evaluation. And so it's changed our thinking on this, that we really need to have someone embedded into local projects in virtually every situation.
Oh, sorry, there's a question. Go ahead.
Hi, my name's Tina Walla from the city of Seattle. In both of the cases, I really appreciate that you stressed or highlighted community engagement as a key part of these efforts. And I just want to push on that a little bit and ask, like, who do you really consider the audience for this work? Because when I think about messaging to the public, I think about my mom, right? And she's a lovely woman, but at the end of the day, she probably wouldn't care or understand, like, evaluations. And I loved the tweets that you put up for MPD, because I saw one of the tweets was like, they actually make it, they explain it in real terms. But I just want to press and ask, like, who do you really consider the audience when you think about your messaging about this work? Because that's something that we struggle with, and so I'd love to learn.
So I'll just say is that they have a bunch of different versions of the results in different languages. So it depends on who you are. So they have an academic version, and then they have the layman's version. So, but truth be told, I think I can speak for DC is that everything we do is about the people that we serve. I mean, as the city, right? Is making sure that we're that our decisions are based on what's good for them. So our answers and our responses are geared towards the people that are electing our officials and paying our paychecks. So at the end of the day, and I think we show that with a lot of the engagements and stuff we did. I mean, they did a very good job of reaching out to every segment of DC and getting them to come in. We spoke to high school kids. We spoke to people in colleges. We had open community forums. I mean, it was literally across the board. So it's just figuring out, and the hard part is having the resources to get the message in so many different formats and get it out. That is the hard part.
I will say that actually there's just supplementary materials that are more academic in nature. The main paper and the graph I showed is the graph. I think the director of the lab was presenting at the policing conference, and I'm going to quote him, I think, here in saying that if you didn't think you were going to learn about confidence intervals on a Sunday morning, like, buck up, we're going to do this right now. And so the idea was a little bit around, reaching as many people as we could who we know are affected by policing. Like, policing affects, a lot of people interact with the police, right? And they care about those interactions, and we should all care about how those interactions go. So the goal was really to reach as far as we could. And then in doing that process, make it accessible, definitely, but also teach that process as well, so that we're starting to implement that kind of cultural shift, not just within government, but in the messaging we do for the community as well.
I think a lot of that resonates for the Rochester example. We're certainly not messaging our findings at this point, but the importance of the evaluation and why we chose to structure it in this way, a lot of similarities at the high level. And then I'd say, the under budgeting of the marketing effort, I think it's really important for a program like this to have skilled marketing support to be able to message in those different levels, and that it takes resources to do that. And then I think we have, communicating to people in the recruitment effort is a whole kind of another separate thing. We really didn't even get much into the evaluation component. We just, at a very basic level, are telling people we're evaluating this program to make sure that it's a good use of taxpayer dollars and that it's actually helping you and your neighbors, and we're doing that in the best way we possibly can. I think that's very basically how we talked about it, and going to people where they are and speaking to them at a very basic level, going to people at their homes, not necessarily going to neighborhood meetings where you have not necessarily the target population that you're trying to serve. It's really hard to connect with the people who need these services the most, and we found door-to-door is really the only way to do that.
So I'm sorry that we're out of time. June, I'm sorry.
I'll ask.
But you can ask it later. So I just want to thank the panelists for their time and for these interesting stories.